Today, we're descending into one of the most horrifying chapters in medieval history, the Spanish Inquisition. This is the story of how religious devotion transformed into systematic terror, how faith became fear, and how an entire nation became a prison where your thoughts could get you killed. Picture this nightmare. It's a cold morning in 1481 in Seville. You hear screaming from the town square. You know what it means. Another auto da fe, another public burning. But this time, you recognize the voices. They belong to your neighbors, the quiet family who lived next door. Their only crime. Someone reported that they didn't eat pork on Sundays. This wasn't fiction. This was reality in medieval Spain, where the Spanish Inquisition created a reign of terror so complete that it makes modern horror stories seem tame by comparison. Medieval Europe had seen religious persecution before, but nothing on the scale of what Queen Isabella and King Ferdinand were about to unleash. In 1478, these Catholic monarchs received papal authorization to establish their own Inquisition, a decision that would drench Spain in blood for centuries. But this wasn't just about religious purity. This was medieval Europe's most calculated power grab, disguised as holy work. Spain in the late 15th century was a complex melting pot. For centuries, Christians, Muslims, and Jews had coexisted, creating a rich cultural tapestry. However, this diversity was seen as a threat by the Catholic monarchs, who wanted to unify Spain under one faith, their faith. The immediate targets were the Conversos, Jews who had converted to Christianity, often under pressure or force. Many of these converts had become wealthy merchants, doctors, and even held positions in the church hierarchy. Their success bred resentment among old Christians, who suspected that many Conversos were secretly practicing Judaism. Here's where it gets sinister. The Inquisition wasn't really about religious purity. It was about power and wealth. By targeting successful Conversos, the crown could confiscate their property, eliminate political rivals, and satisfy the bloodthirsty mob that demanded religious conformity. The Spanish Inquisition operated like a well-oiled machine of terror, with a bureaucracy that would make the most efficient modern government envious. At the top sat the Inquisitor General, appointed directly by the crown. Below him were regional tribunals, each with its own staff of inquisitors, prosecutors, and torturers. The process began with the Edict of Faith, a public announcement giving people 30 days to confess their sins or report the sins of others. This created an atmosphere of paranoia where everyone was a potential informant. Neighbors spied on neighbors, servants betrayed their masters, and children were encouraged to report their own parents. The accusations didn't need to be serious. You could be reported for refusing to eat pork, for changing your clothes on Saturday, or even for crying when someone mentioned Jesus Christ, because apparently Jews cried differently than Christians according to these madmen. Once accused, you were arrested in secret, usually at dawn. Your property was immediately confiscated to pay for your trial costs, money that conveniently rarely got returned, even if you were found innocent. The trial process was a masterpiece of psychological torture, designed to extract confessions regardless of guilt or innocence. Prisoners were held in underground cells, often for months or years, with no knowledge of their specific charges or who had accused them. The inquisitors used a twisted form of legal procedure that made conviction almost inevitable. The accused couldn't know the identity of their accusers, couldn't have legal representation that actually defended them, and faced judges who had already presumed their guilt. But the real horror began in the torture chambers. The Spanish Inquisition perfected the art of extracting confessions through pain while keeping meticulous records of every scream, every plea, every broken bone. They used 3 primary torture methods, each more horrifying than the last. The garrucha. The victim's hands were tied behind their back, attached to a rope, and then hoisted into the air. Weights were added to their feet, slowly dislocating shoulders and tearing muscles. Victims would hang there for hours, while inquisitors calmly asked questions, as if they were having a casual conversation over tea. The toca, water torture that would make modern waterboarding look merciful. The victim was strapped to an inclined board, their mouth forced open with an iron prong, and then gallons of water were poured down their throat through a cloth. They would experience the sensation of drowning over and over again, never knowing when or if it would end. The potro, a rack that stretched the victim's body until joints separated and bones broke. The inquisitors would turn the mechanism slowly, counting each click, asking questions between each agonizing adjustment. Many victims were permanently crippled, their bodies twisted into unnatural shapes. Here's what makes this even more sickening. The inquisitors believed they were saving souls. In their twisted minds, physical torture was merciful because it could prevent eternal damnation. They kept detailed records, noting how many times they turned the rack, how long they applied water torture, treating human suffering like a scientific experiment. If you survived the torture and confessed, and most people confessed to anything just to make the pain stop, you faced the auto da fe, literally act of faith. These were public spectacles designed to terrorize the population and demonstrate the Inquisition's power. Picture the largest square in the city, packed with thousands of spectators. Wooden platforms erected like a theater stage, but instead of actors, the performers were broken human beings about to face their final judgment. The condemned were dressed in distinctive garments called sanbenitos, yellow robes decorated with flames and demons for those to be burned alive, or crosses for those receiving mercy. They wore tall, pointed hats called carrozas, making them look like grotesque caricatures of themselves. The procession began before dawn. Prisoners shuffled forward in chains, many barely able to walk after months of torture. Dominican friars walked alongside them, offering last-minute chances to confess and convert, while crowds jeered and threw garbage. The lucky ones, if you can call anyone in this situation lucky, would be strangled before burning, a mercy granted to those who confessed and showed repentance. But those who maintained their innocence or refused to convert faced the most horrific death imaginable, being burned alive while conscious. The smell of burning flesh would fill the air as families watched their loved ones die in agony. Children were brought to witness these spectacles as a form of religious education. The message was clear. This is what happens to those who defy the one true faith. Famous cases that shock the conscience. Let me tell you about some specific cases that illustrate the case of Elvira del Campo, a young woman tortured for hours because she wouldn't eat pork and was suspected of secretly practicing Judaism. Under torture, she confessed to crimes she never committed, implicating her entire family. Her confession, extracted through agony, led to the arrest and execution of 12 family members. The Massacre of Chuetas in Majorca. Between 1678 and 1691, the Inquisition systematically destroyed the Jewish community in Majorca. 37 people were burned alive, and hundreds more were imprisoned, tortured, and had their property confiscated. Entire family lines were wiped out, and their descendants were marked with shame for generations. The case of Maria de Cazalla, a spiritual woman who believed in direct communication with God, was accused of heresy. She was tortured repeatedly over 2 years, her body broken so completely that she could barely speak by the end. Her crime? Believing that she could have a personal relationship with God without going through the church hierarchy. These weren't isolated incidents, they were the norm. The Inquisition processed over 150,000 cases during its existence, with an estimated 32,000 people executed and hundreds of thousands more tortured, imprisoned, or exiled. The horror didn't stop with Spain. The Spanish Inquisition exported its methods to Spanish colonies in the Americas, establishing tribunals in Mexico, Peru and Cartagena. Indigenous peoples who had been forced to convert to Christianity faced the same brutal treatment if they were suspected of returning to their ancestral beliefs. In the New World, the Inquisition took on an additional racial dimension. Native Americans, Africans, and mixed-race individuals faced suspicion simply because of their heritage. The institution became a tool for maintaining Spanish colonial dominance, using terror to keep subjugated populations in line. The Portuguese Inquisition, inspired by the Spanish model, established its own reign of terror, targeting Conversos, who had fled Spain thinking they would find safety across the border. There was no escape from this persecution. It followed victims wherever they went. What's perhaps most disturbing about the Spanish Inquisition is how it corrupted an entire society. Ordinary people became informants, motivated by a toxic combination of religious fervor, personal grudges, and material gain. Anyone who reported a heretic received a portion of the confiscated property, turning betrayal into a profitable business. The Inquisition created a culture of fear so pervasive that people policed their own behavior constantly. They were afraid to speak freely, afraid to eat certain foods, afraid to practice hygiene in ways that might seem Jewish or Muslim. Families stopped talking about their ancestry, burning documents and destroying anything that might connect them to non-Christian heritage. Children grew up in this atmosphere of terror, learning that questioning authority or thinking independently could lead to torture and death. The intellectual and cultural life of Spain was devastated as people stopped asking questions, stopped innovating, stopped creating anything that might be seen as challenging orthodox beliefs. The Spanish Inquisition officially ended in 1834, but its effects lasted much longer. Families marked as descendants of heretics faced discrimination for centuries. The Chuetas of Majorca, for example, were treated as social outcasts well into the 20th century. The institution destroyed Spain's intellectual tradition. While other European countries experienced the Renaissance and Enlightenment, Spain remained trapped in medieval thinking, its brightest minds either killed, exiled, or terrorized into silence. Perhaps most tragically, the Inquisition's methods became a template for future persecutions. The systematic dehumanization, the bureaucracy of terror, the use of torture to extract confessions. These techniques would be employed by totalitarian regimes throughout history. The Spanish Inquisition stands as one of history's clearest examples of what happens when religious fanaticism combines with political power and popular prejudice. It shows us how quickly a society can descend into barbarism when fear overrides compassion, when orthodoxy becomes more important than truth, and when the end is used to justify any means. For over 3 centuries, this institution turned Spain into a nation of informants and victims, where the knock on the door in the middle of the night could mean torture, death, and the destruction of entire families. It claimed to save souls while destroying lives, claimed to serve God while serving only power and greed. The victims of the Spanish Inquisition, the Conversos, the Moriscos, the free thinkers, and countless innocents caught in its web of terror, deserve to be remembered not just as statistics, but as individual human beings who suffered unimaginable cruelty in the name of religious purity. Their stories remind us that the capacity for evil exists in every society, in every era, and that eternal vigilance is the price of freedom. The question we must ask ourselves is not whether such horrors could happen again, but how we can ensure they never do. The Spanish Inquisition remains one of medieval Europe's most chilling examples of institutionalized terror. For over 3 centuries, it turned an entire nation into a surveillance state, where fear ruled every aspect of daily life. If this journey into the darkness of medieval history fascinated you, make sure to subscribe to Medieval Sins for more shocking revelations from Europe's bloodiest era. Hit that notification bell, because the darkest secrets of history are waiting to be unveiled. Remember, in medieval Europe, your faith could save your soul, or it could destroy your life entirely. The year is 1596. In the main square of Mexico City, thousands of people watch in horror. Flames are rising, and the screams of 9 human beings pierce the air. Among them stands a young man, Luis de Carvajal, 27 years old, intelligent, educated, and someone who chose to die rather than abandon his faith. But this story doesn't begin on that terrible day. This story begins with a family's struggle to survive, their secret beliefs, and their desperate attempt to escape the merciless claws of the Spanish Inquisition. In the late 16th century, the Carvajal family embarked on a journey filled with hope. Actually, this was their second great escape. First from Spain to Portugal, and now from Portugal to the New World, to Mexico. Why? Because they were Conversos, Jews who had been forced to convert to Christianity but secretly maintained their Jewish faith. Luis de Carvajal the Elder, the family patriarch, was a man of ambition and cunning. He had managed to secure a position as governor of the province of Nuevo León in northern Mexico. It seemed like the perfect opportunity, a chance to build a new life thousands of miles away from the prying eyes of the Spanish Inquisition. The family settled into their new life with cautious optimism. Luis the Younger, our tragic hero, was just a child when they arrived. He grew up in this strange new world, speaking Spanish, attending Catholic Mass, and living outwardly as a devout Christian. But behind closed doors, his mother Francisca taught him the ancient prayers of his ancestors, the rituals that connected him to a faith that had survived centuries of persecution. As Luis grew into adulthood, he became increasingly devout, not in Christianity, but in the Jewish faith his family had never truly abandoned. He learned Hebrew, studied the Torah, and began to see himself as a teacher and leader of the secret Jewish community that had formed in Mexico. This was incredibly dangerous. The Spanish Inquisition had followed the conquistadors to the New World, and Mexico City had its own tribunal of the Holy Office. The inquisitors were always watching, always listening for signs of heresy, and practicing Judaism was considered one of the worst forms of heresy imaginable. But Luis couldn't help himself. He was passionate, idealistic, and deeply spiritual. He began conducting secret Sabbath services, teaching other conversos about their ancestral faith, and even writing beautiful, heartfelt prayers and meditations. He kept detailed journals of his spiritual journey, writing in a code that mixed Spanish, Hebrew, and Latin. In 1589, the inevitable happened. Someone informed on the family. Maybe it was a jealous neighbor, maybe a former friend, or perhaps someone who had been tortured by the Inquisition and gave up names to stop their own suffering. We'll never know for certain. Luis de Carvajal the Elder was arrested first. The charges were serious: practicing Judaism, holding secret religious ceremonies, and corrupting other Christians. Under interrogation and torture, he revealed information about his family's practices. Soon, the Inquisition came for the rest of them. Luis the Younger was thrown into the secret prisons of the Holy Office. These weren't ordinary jails. They were specially designed chambers of psychological torment. Prisoners were kept in complete isolation, never knowing if it was day or night, never knowing when the door might open and the torturers might enter. For months, Luis endured interrogation after interrogation. The inquisitors were patient, methodical, and utterly ruthless. They had all the time in the world, and they knew exactly how to break a person's spirit. They would ask the same questions over and over. Do you practice the law of Moses? Do you keep the Sabbath? Do you believe Jesus Christ is the true Messiah? After nearly 2 years of imprisonment, Luis finally broke. Faced with the choice between death and reconciliation, he chose to live. In 1590, he appeared at an auto de fe, a public ceremony where heretics were either executed or reconciled to the church. Wearing the yellow San Benito, the humiliating garment of the penitent heretic, Luis publicly confessed his sins and begged for forgiveness. He was sentenced to wear the San Benito for the rest of his life, to attend Mass regularly, and to report any heretical activity he encountered. He was also banned from holding any public office or position of trust. But he was alive, and he was free. For a few years, it seemed like Luis had learned his lesson. He appeared to be a model penitent, attending church regularly and keeping a low profile. But appearances can be deceiving. Despite everything he had endured, Luis couldn't abandon his faith. The years of imprisonment and humiliation had not broken his spirit. They had only strengthened his resolve. Secretly, gradually, he began to practice Judaism again. He started writing once more, creating beautiful prayers and meditations that reflected his deep spiritual longing. He began to gather other Conversos around him, forming a small but devoted community of secret Jews. They met in private homes, celebrated the Sabbath in whispered voices, and found comfort in their shared faith and shared danger. Luis kept detailed records of his spiritual journey, writing in his secret code. His journals from this period are heartbreaking. They reveal a young man wrestling with questions of faith, identity, and survival. He wrote about his love for God, his longing for the land of Israel, and his dreams of a time when Jews could practice their faith openly. The final betrayal. In 1595, disaster struck again. This time, it may have been Luis's own sister, Isabel, who betrayed the family. Under interrogation by the Inquisition, she revealed that Luis had returned to his heretical practices. She told them about the secret meetings, the hidden prayers, and the coded journals. The inquisitors were furious. They had shown mercy once, and Luis had repaid that mercy with deception and continued heresy. This time, there would be no forgiveness. Luis was arrested again, along with his mother, Francisca, and several other family members. This time, they knew there would be no escape. The Inquisition had a special hatred for relapsos, those who returned to heresy after being reconciled to the Church. For them, there was only one punishment: death. In his cell, facing certain death, Luis made a decision that would define his legacy. He would not recant again. He would not betray his faith or his community. If he was going to die, he would die as a Jew, not as a Christian. He spent his final months writing prayers, meditations, and letters to his family. His writings from this period are among the most beautiful and moving documents of the Inquisition era. He wrote about his acceptance of death, his love for his family, and his unshakable faith in God. One of his most famous prayers begins, Adonai, God of Israel, you who know all secrets and see all hidden things, you know that I am dying for your holy law and for the faith of our ancestors. On December 8, 1596, Mexico City witnessed one of the largest and most terrible auto-da-fe in its history. 9 people were burned alive that day, including Luis de Carvajal and his mother Francisca. Thousands gathered to watch as the stakes were lit and the flames began to rise. According to witnesses, Luis faced his death with remarkable courage. As the flames consumed him, he was heard reciting the Shema, the most sacred prayer of Judaism. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. His mother, Francisca, an elderly woman who had spent her entire life hiding her true faith, died alongside her son, also refusing to recant at the final moment. The story of Luis de Carvajal is more than just a tale of religious persecution. It's a testament to the power of faith, the strength of the human spirit, and the terrible cost of intolerance. His journals, somehow preserved despite the Inquisition's attempts to destroy all evidence of his heresy, give us a window into the mind and heart of a man who chose death over betrayal of his deepest beliefs. In our modern world, it's easy to forget the courage it took to maintain one's faith in the face of such persecution. Luis de Carvajal reminds us that freedom of conscience is never free. It must be won and defended, sometimes at the ultimate cost. The Inquisition believed it could control not just actions, but thoughts and beliefs themselves. The story of Luis de Carvajal proves that some things, love, faith, and the human spirit, can never truly be conquered, no matter how terrible the persecution.